Welcome to Emerging Franchise Brands, the podcast that introduces you to the visionary founders of America's fastest growing franchise opportunities. We'll also hear from industry pros as they share insights on what it really takes to achieve the elusive milestone of 100 plus locations. I am your host, Frank Feldman, founder of I9 Sports, and my 20-year journey from inception to acquisition has given me a unique perspective on how to succeed in franchising. Join me as we welcome today's guest. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. On today's show, I have the brand ambassador of Apple Pie Capital, Ron Feldman. Ron, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great, Ron. Great to see you again. It's been a while.
It's been a long time. You and I are ancient.
Yes. I don't want to use ancient, though. Well, anyway, let's get started here. So I brought you on because you have so much experience and so many vast, areas of franchising. And I want to talk a little bit about what Apple Pie Capital is, of course, and your expertise in franchising. And I know the projects that you're so passionate about. I want to start, though, by getting a little more to know about you. I want the audience to hear about Ron and where your background was that led you to franchising.
Sure. First half of my career, I spent in the burglar alarm business. Didn't have anything to do with franchising. And when I was exiting that business and we knew we were going to sell it, I was in my 30s and I was like, well, what am I going to do after we sell this business? And my wife got an interview to be a director of a Goddard school. And she went and had this interview and they offered her the job. And she said, but it's a franchise. And I said, well, I don't want you to be a director. We're going to become a franchisee. We went through the discovery process. We were very early in the Goddard system. Found out that Goddard's ownership was also the person that started AMCO and Mako.
Okay.
Fell in love with franchising. We operated a Goddard school for about 10 years. We were going to become, the empire of Goddard. And I have a little flaw in that I curse too much to be in a preschool. So it wasn't really thing for me to be in the school anyway.
It's a small issue. I mean,
No one wanted to say, guess what Uncle Ron taught me today?
Uncle Ron from Philadelphia.
Yeah, exactly.
Bringing his Philly to the preschool.
So, but I got very friendly with Tony Martino, who's the guy that started. AMCO is Anthony A. Martino Company. Mako is Martino A. Anthony Company. I got very close with him. And as I exited the alarm business, I had a transactional M&A background. And he basically said, can you help my franchisees get financed in Mako more so than anything else? And he and I became pretty close. He became a mentor to me and taught me the ropes. I became kind of their outsourced finance department. Went to all the discovery days, went to all of the team meetings as a contractor, and did all this while we were running the Goddard School. I hooked up with a guy named Bernie Siegel, who you know probably. Mm-hmm. We built a pretty big finance practice out of that. And then 2008 came, and that was, for those people, if you're emerging, you probably didn't have to live through this and trying to get franchisees finance, but the banks stopped lending and the community banks that did lend wouldn't pay brokers anymore. That business model was crushed. And I went on the road trying to figure out what to do. And I got very friendly with Daryl Johnson and IFA at the time. Matt Shea was the CEO back then. Went up on Capitol Hill and did all kinds of advocacy work. And with Daryl, created a brand scoring model that I was able to convince a bank to give us $400 million to deploy in the middle of the Great Recession, which we deployed most of it. And and we're off to the races. So that's kind of how I got my bones in this business. Being a franchise, I was also a franchisee in the Meineke system for kind of as a silent partner. Nate, my ex-partner, and I had a tax credit franchise. So I've been a franchisee 3 times.
Wow.
So everything through a franchisee's eyes, not so much from a franchisor's eyes. Tony was a man of very few words, Tony Martino. He never graduated high school dropout, and brought actually Cotman transmissions was his doing. he brought 4 franchise brands national.
Wow.
And the thing that he said to me that I still repeat all the time is franchising simple, provided franchisees make money. If that's true, then everybody wins. Mm-hmm. So everything really with a 4-wall unit economic mind. That's how I've been underwriting brands for 30 years, and it's worked.
That's awesome. Well, once again, you proved that the old, saying franchising finds you. And I mean, who knew, because your wife was going to, work at Goddard, that's how you would be, go into this industry like that.
Exactly what happened.
Amazing. Yeah. So because you were a franchisee a few times over and on the financing side, I want to talk about, one of the probably the most important part of franchising that I know is part of your passion. And that is the importance of franchisee transparency. We have a lot of people who in our audience that are emerging franchisor founders. They're trying to get their franchise system established. They're trying to get to that point where they're a mature brand. So I would love for you to kind of hone in more on the importance of the transparency side of franchisor, franchisee, and what exactly should that look like?
If you're an emerging franchisor, one of the most important things for you to do is make sure you're doing apples to apples comparisons. And the best way to do that is to have an approved chart of accounts that your franchisees must use. What each of those chart of accounts defines. In other words, what goes into this category, what goes into this category. Goddard did a great job of that when I got started. They'll tell you how long ago this was. We would fax our monthly P&Ls to corporate, and they would publish them to the entire chain, not anonymously. Everyone knew what everyone else's business was, and it created a level of competition between franchisees that really led to overperformance at the time. They're still that way. If you look at the Goddard FDD today, there is a P&L for all 500 schools in the item 19. They don't name which school it is in the FDD, but they're all there. So as an emerging brand, get an approved chart of accounts and get on a regular cadence of collecting P&Ls. And there's a lot of tools that you can use to do that, to make it simple. I work with a company called Profit Keeper. That's one. You can do whatever you need to do, but collect the P&Ls and use them. Aggregate the data. Give your franchisees the ability to benchmark themselves against your corporate stores. Create that KPI early on of where you want your business model to be. If you do that, you'll identify problems sooner. And the last thing an emerging franchisor wants is a unit to go dark. That's a really bad outcome if you want to grow and you want to attract investment capital or attract banks to your franchisees. Having an item 20 that has closed units when you only have 10 open and 3 closed, not going to work.
Right. One caveat I want to add to what you just said is, for an emerging franchise that's listening to this, it's one thing to collect the financial data. It's another thing to actually use it and apply it and giving the feedback to the franchise network.
100%.
Don't collect it if you're not going to do anything with it.
Well, exactly. And your field business consultants, or whatever acronym you use, should have the P&Ls before they go. They should know where they're missing, if their labor's off, if their cost of goods is off. They should know that before they get there. And that's I'm not doing a commercial, but that's the beauty of what Profit Keeper does. Just makes it simple. All the stakeholders know where everyone is in real time. And that's really important.
Yeah. So in my experience, I did not collect financials when we first started. And we realized that it was important because we did have people like, a lot of emerging franchisors. We had people all over the map, right? From successful to struggling and everywhere in between. So maybe to prepare an emerging founder listening to this, I'd suggest, one, do what you just said. First of all, get it as early as possible. And if you haven't gotten the financials yet, get them now. Like tomorrow is not soon enough. What we ended up doing when we got the financials is we realized, though, that we did need to give feedback. Creating a scorecard with those KPIs, like you were saying, like specific for your model, is so critical. My hesitation back then was, oh my gosh, if I expose all the numbers to all the franchisees across, have full transparency, are the franchisees that aren't doing well going to be upset? And, is it going to motivate? And what I did find is that, yes, it did exactly what you said, Ron. It did motivate, because I'm sure there are people listening to this going, oh my gosh, I haven't collected financials yet, or I'm going to collect them. And you mean to tell me I'm going to be transparent? Like I'm going to show all the data? And to your point, the answer is absolutely yes, right?
100%. And I'll tell you, Tony Martino in his simplicity was brilliant. When he did the Goddard convention or the Mako convention, he would only have programming until 12:30, 1 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
Say, go to the pool. And but before he did that, he would bring up the top performers and they would hold court at the pool and everybody would go and find out what they're doing right.
Right. And tell me about the franchise. I'm not trying to badmouth any franchise, but what do you think happens when a franchisee that's not performing well also is one of the loudest franchises in the system, and then suddenly the data becomes transparent? What happens to that person?
Well, you consider the source, right?
Right.
If 85 franchisees are doing great and 5 are not, and the 5 are the loudest, well, then maybe they should start listening. I was not a good franchisee. I was the franchisee that raised my hand at the owners' meetings. And one of the other things I coined was a term called frantrepreneur.
Okay.
Right? You can't be an entrepreneur and a franchisee because you're there to follow a system and you're not there to invent the system. That's what an entrepreneur does. But we were a high performer. We were a very high performer and I was loud. That gives you license to be loud. And, if you're an underperformer, keep your mouth shut and find the good ones and go do what they're doing.
Right. I think that's a great point, because on the flip side, if you're struggling, but you're trying to wield a lot of power, it does disempower that franchise across the network. They're like, this person is just, they complain about everything. But the transparency, the key to it is that across the whole network, it's for people to aspire to being among the best. And it's not just being, the top franchise who people can say, oh, he or she has the best territory. You can see everybody across the board, which is so important. And hopefully it's people in all different regions of the country.
Absolutely. And, you can slice and dice the data however you think it's valid for your franchisees to see it. Because, it's in some cases you have different footprints. If you have different footprints with different capacities in the preschool model, you're limited by whatever state you're in as to how many kids you can have in there. So you might want to slice it up to the ones that can hold this many units or that many units. That's why I was not a good Goddard franchise. Again, apples to apples comparison.
Yeah. And having several KPIs to truly measure and help bridge the gap where a franchise might be struggling. So for example, maybe in Goddard and maybe even in using an I9 Sports example, it might be people who have inquired, number of members or number of inquiries versus the number of registrations or the number of attendees. So we know the conversion rate to how long, or the renewal percentage, or how long is the life cycle of a customer. There's so many different ways of slicing it up, but it's important to, as an emerging founder, that you have your KPIs identified early in your system.
100%. As a franchise development person, you want to know how many leads you're getting to how many franchises you're selling, right? So it's no different for if you're in the personal care space. It's how many times does the phone ring or the lead comes in? How many leads does it take to get an appointment, and how many appointments does it take to get a sale or a membership? I used to tease our director at the Goddard School that, every tour that she did, that was the term at Goddard, was tour. Every tour you did was worth $70,000 if you sold it, because we're going to keep that kid for 5 years. Right. If they or we don't screw up, we're going to keep that kid. And, it's that important. And again, teaching whoever that salesperson is in the unit, how important that tour, demo, whatever you're doing is paramount to success at the franchisee level.
Mm-hmm. So Ron, one of the things I want to talk about is the differences that you see between a first-time franchisee and an expanding franchisee.
I'll take it from a lender's standpoint. So a lender's looking at a first-time franchisee in an emerging brand as a lot of risk. And the reason is the brand isn't, especially when it's the first unit in a new market. Now you've got a bunch of all these red flags to a credit person at a bank. So keep your standards high, really high. and don't take somebody who is using their last nickel of their retirement money and they're going to have 1 month's extra working capital and they're leaving their job. Don't put them in that position. Don't accept that person. I know it's hard because you need that franchise fee to make payroll, and I understand that. But when units go bad, the only ones that make money are the litigators. And nobody wants to pay litigators. There's no win. There's litigation. There's no winner. Right. Keep your standards high. Lenders are going to look at all that, and they're going to look more at borrower's strength than at the brand as an emerging brand. Now, if you're an established brand, if you're going to open a Jersey Mike's, okay, everyone knows what Jersey Mike's is. Do you meet their qualifications? Well, they've got almost 3,000 units. We're going to accept their selection process more than they are, Ron's sandwich shop that has 4 units open. So that's really important for the first timers. Make sure that they're very well capitalized if you're in an emerging brand. If you're an expanding franchisee, in other words, you have 1 unit, you want to open 1 more, 2 more, 5 more, whatever that is, make sure the development schedule aligns with their ability to actually open them, scale them, have the infrastructure to manage them. As soon as you get to 3 units in a brick and mortar franchise, you need a district supervisor. You need an employee because you can't get to all 3 of those every day. And you need to now build your own franchisee infrastructure. Make sure they're well capitalized. If your requirements are 250 liquid and 500 net worth, and they want to do a 3-pack, or even better, and the broker or the FSO wants to sell them a 3-pack, triple it. Make it 750 and $1.5 million. Make sure they have the money to get all 3 of these things open. Or else, especially if you're paying a third party for the sale, you're not getting that money back.
Right. It's so true. It's pay now or pay later, right?
Exactly. So franchisee strength is really important in the emerging brand side. You can take an average or lower capitalized franchisee in an established system, and the brand will carry them. The brand can't carry them in the emerging world. In the emerging world, they got to carry themselves.
Right. All right. So what is financing looking like now?
Expensive.
Right. Well, we know it's expensive. What about qualification?
So in the emerging world, the SBA is your friend. Small Business Association lending is probably the number one. The 401k rollover, Rob's product, are your friends as an emerging brand. It's out there. It's gettable. Size matters. And that we talked about brand size. Now let's talk about loan size. It costs a bank the same amount of money to do $1 million loan as it does for them to do $250,000. I
remember you told me that in 2008. You and I had a conversation specifically about my brand because it wasn't a high investment.
Right.
And you said the difficulty is just that. You're causing the same amount of work for the bank. They're not all excited to do a deal for a low investment franchise to get in. Especially
in the 7A world. Now, the SBA has made some changes recently that make it more friendly. Restrictions off of lower ticket loans. Getting an SBA loan is still much like getting a proctology exam. It's not a pleasant process. You just have to do what they tell you to do. A bank makes an SBA loan because the government is co-signing the loan. That's the reason they're in that business. If the I's aren't dotted and the T's aren't crossed, and it used to be that it had to be signed in blue ink. Now at least we have DocuSign, and you don't have to actually sign things. If it was signed in black ink, it was a flaw in the package. So the package has to be perfect. If you're an emerging brand, align yourself with one of the IFA members that helps emerging brands, franchisees get financing. The leaders are Benetrends, Guidant, and Franfund. Those are that are the established brands. Talk to all 3 of them and figure out who you have the best relationship with. I don't think you're going to get hurt using any of them.
What about if I'm an emerging franchise system? I'm just getting started. What is you think kind of the threshold of level of investment that I start getting some attraction from some of the banks to do an SBA deal?
If your project size, if your item 7 is over $500,000 to $600,000, then it's more bang for the buck for the bank.
Okay.
If you are a territory-based franchise, then like I9 was, then And quite frankly, if it's $75,000 for somebody to open a territory-based franchise, why do you want them borrowing any money?
That's a great point.
You don't want them to have a payment. It just doesn't make any sense to me anyway. But you want to be careful. If we pivot now to the expanding side,
sure,
you can't expand your way into profitability. If unit one's not doing well, you should really look hard at whether you're going to let them open unit two. You should have an internal metric that is a certificate for expansion, where their QA scores are high enough, they're following the brand model, they're up to date on their remodels, whatever that is, before you let someone open unit two. Because every unit you open that has a higher risk of failure is money the litigators are going to get, number one. Your item 20 is going to get cloudy, and that's not going to be your friend with lenders as you grow. And when you want to have your ultimate exit, your royalty stream is what your company's valued at.
Right. You're just multiplying the problems is what you're going to do by letting them expand.
If you remember the old commercial about the oil changes, you can pay me now or pay me later. Don't make those mistakes. One of the things I think I've learned over 30 years in this business is what not to do.
Yes. We only learn by the mistakes we've made, right? Not by the successes generally.
Seen brands crash and burn because they grew too fast, or they brought in the wrong franchisees, or they put a supply chain in that didn't let the franchisees make money. So,
do you think, I'm going to stop you there for a second here, Ron. Do you think there's a greater risk? Here we are going in 2024 with the amount of expansion that franchisors have had since post-COVID, newer franchisors, there's been massive expansion. Do you think there's a greater risk for a crash and burn in the future, in the next couple of years?
I think there's going to be a thinning of the herd, which happens in every economic cycle. I'll get on a soapbox for a minute.
Please.
If you don't have any corporate units, don't start franchising. I see people that write an FDD, or they have one unit that's open for 6 months and now they're going to franchise. You don't have proof of concept. You don't have scalability. You don't have any of the criteria that the ultimate PE firm or royalty finance transaction, whatever your exit's going to be or your monetization's going to be, you don't have any of that proven.
Right.
So make sure that you have a buttoned up business model. Make sure that you know your unit level economics. I've seen FDDs where you go to the back and the franchisor financials show a balance sheet with $100. Why would I invest my money in you if you've only got $100 in the bank? Right. I mean, that's a true story. I've seen the FDD. So make sure you have corporate units and you have a scalable concept before you start franchise.
I think that's important, because not to mention you're putting too much pressure on yourself of selling franchises to keeping the lights on. It's an unlimited number, but what do you think is ideal as the number of corporate locations you'd like to see a franchisor have before they franchise?
It depends. I hate answering questions with the words "it depends," but you've got to have at least 5 for a few years to even think about it. They can't be in LA or Midtown Manhattan, seeing these brands that start in those two cities, or in Miami, where they're a local thing. That you open a unit in Columbus, Ohio, or Denver, Colorado, or Pittsburgh, PA, and see if it works there. Franchising works in suburbia, where it works.
And franchising is not a money grab for the person that's thinking of, launching a franchise concept, that it's going to take an enormous amount of work to not only get this off the ground, but to be royalty sufficient. So I think, to your point, again, it's really important that you've got your company-owned locations and you're cash flowing.
Well, and you have enough money to do it. I mean, you're going to have to start building infrastructure. When you bring on a franchisee, it's a marriage for however long that franchise agreement is. Mm-hmm. It's expensive. So you're going to need to have field business people. Once you can't do it all. You can't. The founder can't do everything, and eventually you're going to have to start hiring people. And good people are not cheap.
Right. Well, us founders, we try like hell. We try to do everything ourselves until we realize we can't. But what do you think it takes, though, for somebody to leave the emerging phase into a mature or established? What do you think is some of the traits?
Well, royalty self-sufficiency. For those that don't know what that is, it's when your royalty, 50% of your royalty is revenue covers your G&A cost, not your sales cost, but your G&A cost, your support costs. When you hit that, you're somewhat bullet resistant at that point. And that could be, the rule of thumb has been 100 units, but I've seen brands that have done it at 20 units. And I know a brand right now that has 50 units and they're making $1 million. That really, so it depends, but it's when your royalty income covers your G&A costs is really when you've graduated from that startup emerging phase into we called it at Apple Pie, the Uber growth phase. That's when you can really put your pedal to the metal and really grow it quicker.
So let's talk about Apple Pie Capital. So you're the brand ambassador, and how long have you been with the company?
Well, it's interesting. I started as an advisor when I was with FranData back in 2017 when it started. So I was around just about from day one, 2016 actually. And I joined in 2017 as Chief Development Officer. We did $17 million in lending that year. And last year we did $508 million. Apple Pie's a lender, not for the emerging brand. It's for the established brand that has a product that has all the benefits of an SBA loan, but without the process headache, and is really geared toward established brands that want to be in that Uber growth phase. Apple Pie was lending a lot of money to Orange Theory in 2017, 18, and 19. Those were the years that Orange Theory really went crazy. It's a great company. One of the first fintechs in franchising. Apple Pie Capital only lends in franchising. It's not like every other lender has a franchise department. We don't have anything but a franchise department now. I had a health scare last year. I'll get on my soapbox. Anyone who's out there, get your heart checked. Your cholesterol number means nothing. Get the calcium score. Especially if you're north of 50 and a little overweight. Make sure you get yourself checked out properly. So I had this health scare and I turned 60 all within a few months of each other. And I was like, I think it's time for me to not have a day job anymore. I transitioned out of day-to-day. Jamie Davis, who I had hired anyway there, is filling my shoes much better than I filled them. And he's doing a great job. I'm still involved with the company as an advisor, not involved in transactions anymore, but more in relationships. It's something you want to graduate to as an emerging brand. You want to get that product behind your brand, and it's a differentiator. It's really a disruptive product in franchise finance.
What's the criteria where a franchisor qualifies to working with Apple Pie?
They've got to have 25 open units. The first unit must be open for 3 years. That's before we can have a conversation.
Okay.
That's your item 20 better not have any problems in it. By that, I mean terminations, C-stop for other reasons, and wherever else franchisors bury their closed units.
Right.
And you're going to have to share everything. I mean, you're going to get a brand underwrite at that stage. You need to have a loan size north of $400,000.
Okay.
If you're in the emerging space, it's got to be worth the while to do that. Again, because it takes just as long to do a loan for that as it does for a small ticket.
Right.
So where it's really works is there's a product called Recap and Grow. It allows you to borrow money against your existing units to open new units without putting a lien on the new units. And that way you have that new unit to open the next unit.
How does that work? Can you share a little bit more about that?
Sure. Let's say your investment's $500,000 and you have your first unit open and it's got EBITDA of $200,000. You can use the equity you have in that unit. Let's say you borrowed $250 on the first unit. We'll refinance out the $250 and give you at least the down payment on the next unit so that you're not coming out of pocket to open the next unit. Let you grow faster.
Okay.
And that's how we were able to scale from startup to $500 million. We were very involved in PPP back in the day. I've got PTSD from those few months.
You have PTSD from PPP.
By the way, if you're in franchising, when you see Matt Haller, go thank him, because PPP loans were basically written. The bill was written by a bunch of us with the IFA.
Wow.
We don't celebrate that win enough. And we saved small business. We really did.
And Ron, I know you're very passionate about, regulatory and advocacy of the IFA. Should we talk a little bit about the elephant in the room in franchising and this whole joint employer and what your thoughts are on it and where do you think it's going to end up?
I'll try and do this without getting political. Joint employer has been around for a long time, more than a decade. And what it is organized labor's way of getting franchising, specifically quick service restaurants, is who they're going after, to be unionized. If a franchisor has joint liability over the franchisee's employers, it's easier for them to go to the franchisor and say, we want to unionize all of the units versus one unit at a time. That's kind of the background of it. The other thing it does is it breaks the franchisor's business model, because if you're collecting 5 or 6 or 7% royalties and you have liability for your franchisee's employees' sexual harassment claims or workers' comp claims or whatever, you're not going to make any money, because I'm not going to bash lawyers here. I've been known to do that, but they get every pocket they can, those litigators. And the third thing it does is it disenfranchises the franchisee from the equity in their business. They become more of a management level employee of the franchisor. So who benefits from joint employer liability? Organized labor. Nobody else does. IFA's been fighting it. We've beaten it a bunch of times. There was a horrible bill in California. California is where bad legislation for business is born. We ended up with a compromise, and that compromise in quick service is a $20 an hour minimum wage. That's better than what the option was. So which party is in power matters. And they're trying to do it this time with the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, which is an unelected group of 5 people where the majority is appointed by the president, and the president's going to appoint the majority of their own party. Organized labor, if you look at any list of donations to political affiliations, you'll see 99-1 going to the Democratic Party. And so that's where the money's coming to elect those politicians. Those politicians are going to try and serve the folks that give them the money to be elected. Unfortunately, that's the way it works in this country. It's a battle that we will continue to fight and hopefully continue to win.
Where do you think it's going to end up?
Well, I kind of look at the market to see where the market thinks it's going to end up, because I'm not smart enough to predict that. If I was, I'd be playing golf right now or on a boat somewhere. I have not seen a contraction of franchisor EBITDA multiples in the M&A world related to joint employer. There's been a contraction because the interest rates are so high, but that's a market business cycle transaction. That's not an existential threat. I believe that it's going to work out based on that. At least the smarter money is betting that it will work itself out.
I guess it remains to be seen. We'll see how this whole thing hashes out, right? At some point in 2024, we think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I would love your feedback on the crazy statistic that it just still baffles me. I've been around franchising for about 20 years, and we still have 4,000 franchisors. We had 4,000 franchisors in 2003. Ron, why do you think that we get these 300-400 new brands a year and 300 and 400 come off every year? Why are we not getting anywhere?
There's a lot of potential reasons. I don't think the 300 to 400 that go off are necessarily failures. I think they're brands that franchising didn't work out for them. Being a franchisor is if you have 50 corporate locations and now you're deciding to franchise and you realize that you do better running corporate locations than you do managing franchisees who talk back and you can't fire them. So I think, a portion of the ones going off the list are those, and some of them are failures that they should have started franchising. The problem I see is that there's no barrier to entry, and I'm on the side of less regulation is good, but the fact that you can hire a lawyer to write an FDD and sell franchises from it, having never even thought about opening a unit, and that's allowed, is a real problem for me.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that the expectation that somebody has going into franchising could be just, it's just not realistic. And they're they're going to take a flyer on it, and they really don't know what they're getting themselves into. Because we know when you're franchising a company, you're in a completely different business than you were originally in.
Your customer is the franchisee.
Yeah.
The end user, the end customer, the B2C is the franchisee to the consumer, not you. They're not your customer. You're getting a royalty on the franchisee's sales. They're not your sales. They don't count for you.
True. And what about this, the trend we've had over the past few years, the impact of PE being involved in franchising at a much earlier stage now with franchisors and creating these, a platform with a portfolio of brands. What are your thoughts on that? How do you think that's going to impact franchising in the near term and long term?
There's good private equity and there's bad private equity. I don't want to say bad. They're just there to crunch numbers and get a return for their investors. That's what private equity is there to do. Their fiduciary duty is to their investors, not to their investments. So their job is to earn as large a return as they can for the people that put their money in, and the pension funds and the insurance companies that put their money into the PE firm. Franchising is a very attractive business model because there's no real capital expenditure that a franchisor has to make to open new units, because that risk is being borne by the franchisees. They're getting in earlier and earlier, which is, in my mind, taking money off the table for the founders to get later, because the PE firms are trying to get a 25-30% return on their money. And if you're successful, they're going to get that return. I also see, and I don't want to be Ron Downer here, but I got to point out the pitfall. I learned what the pitfalls are. If you're a founder and you sell into a platform and you're a, quote, bolt on to that platform, you're now an employee of the platform. You're going from being an employer to being an employee. And you're going to have an executive that is your boss, who is not the PE firm that bought your company. It's going to be the person they hired to be the boss of the platform. So founder, you need to go in eyes wide open. If you're going into a platform, you need to make that transition emotionally and mentally and financially. Mm-hmm. Now, the good news is you're not going to have to put any paychecks in a drawer. I mean, now I'm dating myself. When we all paychecks.
Yes, I know what you're talking about.
The difference between a small business CEO and a big business CEO is the small business CEO gets paid less, right? That said, if you need that intellectual capital that PE firm's going to bring, and you need that shared service model where you can't afford to have a marketing department and a legal department and accounting department, you can't afford all that G&A. Maybe it makes sense for you to go into a platform, but you've got to weigh all those options as an emerging brand. It's also something that you can't undo. You can't say, time out, I want to be able to undo this. It's a permanent decision. It's like getting a tattoo, right?
Right. Or worse.
Yeah.
You can kind of undo the tattoo.
Yeah, you can. You can at least change what it looks like.
No, I agree. I'm glad you pointed that out, because obviously it's the big trend we've seen in franchising since post-COVID, right? Really more so than ever before at an earlier stage.
Yeah, I work with a company named Diversified Royalty Corporation, where you need to get scale, but they'll actually monetize your royalty stream and you keep the company. Again, it can't be undone, but you get those returns that the PE firm, if you are able to scale the business and you want to stay with the business and you're not burned out, it's an option that everybody should look at. And they should look at all these options and decide what the right option is for them. So it's a way where, let's say you've got to have 3 to 5 million of franchisor level EBITDA to qualify.
Okay.
So it's emerging brand, but the aspiring emerging brand, and they will basically buy your intellectual property and lease it back to you.
Okay.
They then will figure out what your EBITDA is and buy it at a multiple that's not quite a PE multiple, but they'll also agree to buy all your future EBITDA as well. So as you grow, and one of the things that's really cool about once you hit that 100 units is the next 100 units, if the 100 units got you to 3 million of EBITDA, the next 100 units is going to give you 5 to 6 million of EBITDA, because all of your fixed costs are covered in the first 100 units. They'll buy your incremental EBITDA as you grow, and you end up getting a lot more money doing it that way than you would just selling one time to a PE firm and selling a majority. So it's a company that's been around for 20 some years. They're out of Canada. It's a tough find. That founder that has 3 to 5 million of EBITDA and wants to grow it themselves, that's a tough find. Looking for some great companies if anyone's out there.
Well, let me ask you this then. If someone was interested in working with you, how can they get a hold of you?
Sure. My email is ron@franchisestrategysolutions.com. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm easy to find, and I'd love to have a conversation.
Cool. And Apple Pie Capital, is it applepiecapital.com?
Yeah, I'm also ron@applepiecapital.com. So,
cool. I got to ask you, what has been your biggest surprise in franchising in all the years you've been around?
The amount of sharing that is done at these conferences between even direct competitors is mind-boggling. When I did the first Emerging Franchisor Boot Camp in 2017 at the IFA convention, Shelly's son got up in front of this group. Shelly is the founder and still owns 100% of Bright Star Healthcare, and basically put her entire business growth plan in slides and taught it to the whole place. And there were a bunch of healthcare companies in the audience. It is a big tent, and there's enough business for everybody. The fact that we talk about our our franchise family, it's really such an amazing community that you should embrace. And I'll put my IFA hat on. If you're not a member, become a member. IFA is there not just for advocacy, it's there for education. It's there for VetFran. It's there for the diversity program that we're launching. I'm going to be the first vice chair of the Education Foundation.
Nice. Congrats.
And thanks. It's something that the IFA is something, it's the glue that holds everything together. But my biggest surprise is the sense of community.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, mine too. That's so well said. Ron, I always finish with the tip jar at the end of the podcast. The whole episode's been a tip jar, but is there one more thing maybe that you can think of? If I was an entrepreneur looking to franchise my concept, what's maybe one piece of advice you'd give me besides opening company-owned locations, which we definitely know we need to do? What other advice would you give me?
Don't get caught in the trap of selling so many that you can't get them open. There are a lot of outsourced great salespeople out there who will sell a lot of units. If you can't get them open, if you have a sold not open of 500 and you're opening 10, that's a recipe for disaster. Make sure you have compelling unit economics. Unit level economics is what drives everything in franchising.
Amen. Ron, thank you so much. This was fantastic. I appreciate you being on the show. It was great seeing you again. You look awesome. I'm so glad to hear that you're back on your feet and your health is back, and that's great.
Yeah, thank you. Doing things I probably should have been doing instead of smoking cigars and sitting on my butt. I'm out there and exercising and doing all those things I should have been doing for the last 30 years now.
Awesome, Ron. Congrats. All right. Well, thanks again for being on the show.
Take care.
All right. Thank you for tuning into the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. For additional insights, guest applications, and to stay connected, visit us at efbpodcast.com. The Emerging Franchise Brands podcast is for entertainment purposes only, and the views expressed do not necessarily represent those of Emerging Franchise Brands, its host Frank Fumey, or Emerging Franchise Group, LLC. Any discussed franchise or investment opportunity requires thorough investigation, obtaining proper disclosure documents, and expert consultation before making any investment decisions. The podcast and its host do not offer professional advice or endorsements, and they hold no responsibility for actions, representations, accuracy, or consequential damages related to the podcast content.